Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a pretty significant excavation, both intellectually and maybe emotionally for some. We've got this stack of source material, specifically diving into Dr. Roy E. Richmond's linguistic analysis, and it seriously challenges how religion has traditionally viewed divine abandonment.
Yeah, the core issue we're unpacking today revolves around certain Bible verses. Verses that suggest the divine source, let's call it spirit, or just source basically throws up its hands at some point, just gives up on people, leaving them to desolation. And for many of you listening, I mean, these are really potent, often painful verses that have fueled a lot of fear and exclusion.
Oh, absolutely. For centuries, this specific interpretation, this idea of abandonment, has been used, almost weaponized, by religious systems,
Hmm.
to enforce conformity, to demand submission. And it often targets anyone who doesn't quite fit the expected mold, maybe seekers, people questioning things, or, frankly, people whose identity or orientation is just different. The whole weight of condemning or excluding often hangs on that one phrase, God gave them up. And this is where it gets really disruptive. Dr. Richmond's work, when you look closely at the linguistics, suggests that those key words translated as gave them up, well, they actually mean something quite different. Radically different, in fact. When you trace them back to the original Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek roots,
Mm-hmm.
the consistent meaning isn't abandonment at all. It's more like to allow or to release, maybe to permit.
That implies something profound, doesn't it? It suggests the source, what some traditions call the logos or the life principle. It doesn't actually turn away. Instead, it seems to respect human autonomy. It honors the freedom of our own awareness, our consciousness. The divine allows the choice, even if that choice leads down a difficult path.
That completely reframes the whole narrative, moving it away from external judgment towards maybe internal consequence.
Exactly.
So to really explore this, we need to walk through the evidence. We're going to look at the four key passages where this specific phrase, gave them up, shows up. We'll cover 2 Chronicles 30.7, then Psalm 81.1, Acts 7.42, and finally, those really charged verses in Romans 1, specifically 24 and 26.
Sounds good. Let's start maybe with the older text. See if we can establish this pattern of freedom right from the Hebrew scriptures.
Okay, perfect. Let's dive into 2 Chronicles 30, verse 7. The context here is King Hezekiah inviting people back to celebrate Passover. And he warns them not to be like their ancestors who trespassed and were supposedly, quote, given up to desolation. That's the King James phrasing.
Right, and that's where we need to look closely at the Hebrew. The word used is weatanim. Now, it can mean to give, sure, but in this kind of context where people are described as straying, it more accurately means to allow them to do what they want, or perhaps to let them go their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And the Aramaic cognate, yahav, it reinforces this sense of letting go or permitting. It's not an act of rejection from the divine.
So if the source is just allowing people to choose their direction, where does the desolation part come in? Is that not still a form of judgment, maybe passive judgment?
That's a really crucial distinction to make. The desolation isn't presented as a punishment imposed by God. Rather, is shown as the natural, visible consequence of the state of awareness they chose. Our sources often call this separation thinking, this illusion or belief that you're cut off from the source of life itself. And when you operate from that place, that illusion, your actions naturally create disorder, both internally and externally. So the source permits the choice, and the choice bears its own fruit.
Okay, I see. So it becomes much less about an angry God and more about internal coherence or lack thereof. The consequences flow naturally from the chosen path. Following that thread, let's look at Psalm 81, verse 12. The King James Version here is quite dramatic. So I gave them up unto their own heart's lust. This psalm is attributed to Asaph, often used during Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's warning against unfaithfulness.
Mm-hmm. And again, the Hebrew is really illuminating. The word is wash al chihiu. Its core meaning is to send forth, to let go, to let loose, to release, even to dismiss. Fundamentally, it's an act of release. It's like Spirit is saying, look, I honor the integrity of your awareness. If this is the path you insist on choosing, I will step back and allow it. It's really the ultimate respect for free will. Yeah. Almost like letting go of the rope.
The text also mentions them walking in their own counsel and having a stubbornness of heart awareness. How does that connect to this idea of release or freedom?
Well, the allegorical reading suggests that Israel, in these passages, often represents all of humanity, all of us. That stubbornness of heart awareness is essentially the decision to rely solely on our own self-made thoughts, our egoic will, or external human systems, whether political, religious, whatever. Instead of trusting that inner divine principle, the logos within, When people insist on looking outward or just following their own ideas against that deeper knowing, the source simply honors that choice. It's not condemnation, it's acknowledging their autonomy.
Right. That pattern self-reliance leading to allowed consequences seems pretty consistent in the Hebrew texts. But how did this translation issue persist, especially when we get into the New Testament, written in Greek? Let's turn to Acts chapter 7, verse 42.
Okay, Acts 7.42. This is part of Stephen's big, powerful speech before the Sanhedrin. He's recounting Israel's history, highlighting moments of turning away, like the golden calf incident, worshiping the host of heaven. And the traditional translation reads something like, "Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven," implying God pushed them towards idolatry.
But you're saying the Greek structure tells a different story about who is doing the giving up.
Exactly. When you look at the Greek syntax, the word order, the action is actually reflexive. It points back to the people. A more accurate rendering, based on the Greek, is that the people turned from theos, that's the Greek for God or the divine principle, and gave themselves to render homage to idols. They were the ones doing the giving up. They abandoned the interconnection and surrendered themselves to external forms, what the text calls the works of their hands. Theos simply permitted that turning away.
Ah, so the sequence matters. The turning away, the separation thinking came first. And that led them to create external substitutes, rituals, belief systems, idols.
Precisely. The works of their hands. They essentially abandoned their own inner awareness of the divine breath within them and chose these external things instead. The source didn't push them. It allowed them to fully experience the reality they'd chosen for themselves. The real abandonment was self-abandonment.
Which brings us, inevitably, to Romans chapter 1, verses 24 and 26. Dr. Richman really emphasizes these as perhaps the most damaging in terms of historical impact. They've been used so often to condemn, to exclude, particularly around issues of sexuality and identity. Paul's writing to Rome, this cosmopolitan center filled with pagan temples, diverse practices, lots of visible idolatry. He's echoing those old Hebrew prophets, contrasting the inner life with the outer world.
And this is where the linguistic key unlocks the whole passage, I think.
Yeah.
Paul writes, traditionally translated, God also gave them up.
Mm-hmm.
But the crucial element is the Greek. Both verses use the reflexive pronoun autos. That's Strong's number 846 in the concordances. And autos means themselves, their own selves.
Okay, hold on. That little word, autos, changes everything, doesn't it? If it means themselves, how does that restructure Romans 1.24 and 1.26?
It completely flips the subject of the action. If we read it reflecting the reflexive nature of audius, it's not God gave them up, it becomes wherefore they gave up themselves. It wasn't theos giving them up. They gave themselves up to choices, to passions that were out of sync, out of harmony with that inner logos life principle.
Wow. The implications for someone who has carried the shame or the fear from those verses, it's massive. So if the dishonor Paul speaks of isn't about someone's inherent identity, their orientation, who they are, but rather about this act of surrendering to separation thinking, to living out of alignment. What does that mean for us reading this today?
It means the dishonor lies in operating from that lower state of consciousness, fear, separation, inner chaos, rather than living from the coherence of the inner logos. The text actually affirms that the divine spirit never cursed anyone for who they are. Spirit honors the freedom of awareness. The only giving up described is humanity choosing to live solely from its own separate counsel. And even then, the life principle, the source, remained within them, as the very breath sustaining them. That's the radical freedom the source grants.
And that leads us right back to consequences, doesn't it? If the abandonment is ultimately self-imposed, then the negative experiences, the torment, what some might call hell, that must be an internal reality too.
Yes, connecting the dots, the torment is experienced right here and now, within our own awareness, when we live under that illusion of being separate. Consequences aren't punishments handed down by some external judge. They are simply the natural, unavoidable result, the fruit, of walking a path that's out of harmony with our true nature. The source allows cause to produce its effect. Simple as that.
Okay, this brings us towards a synthesis. And interestingly, Paul himself, the writer of Romans 1, seems to provide the key to understanding this freedom elsewhere. But these other verses often get ignored when people quote Romans 1. I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, and chapter 10, verse 23. Paul says, all things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient.
Exactly. That principle is like the practical user's guide to the radical freedom we've been discussing. If you translate that phrase from the Greek, understanding this context of freedom, Paul is essentially saying, everything is permitted, that's the lawful part. but not everything brings harmony. That's the expedient part.
Let's break that down because that feels really important for applying this. All things are lawful. That
Yeah.
confirms the core idea, right? No divine rejection. Nothing truly separates us from the life principle. So what's the function of expedient? What does that add?
Expedient introduces the element of wisdom. It poses the question, does the path you're choosing, the choice you're making, does it align with the inner rhythm, the coherence of your true self, that logos life? Does it build up your spiritual understanding, lead towards inner peace? Or does the choice actually enslave you, maybe to lower passions, to fear, to shame, perhaps even to rigid religious guilt? The goal isn't following external rules. It's applying wisdom to the freedom you already possess.
So the point is to consciously use the freedom that the Source has inherently granted us, to refuse to be controlled by fear or addiction or even religious legalism,
Wow.
and instead choose to align with what is genuinely beneficial, what's truly expedient for our soul's growth and well-being.
That's the heart of the message, yes. This whole linguistic journey through these key verses, it demonstrates that the spirit breath never actually gave people up. People themselves surrendered their awareness, gave themselves up to a lower counsel, to separation thinking. The Source honors our freedom completely, but it never leaves. It always remains within us, as the very breath of life that sustains us moment by moment.
Which means the real good news, the true gospel perhaps, isn't about avoiding abandonment. It's that the Source doesn't give people up. The Source lifts people up. That means you, listening right now, you are eternally loved and embraced, exactly as you are, wherever you are in your journey. The consequences we face are simply feedback, reflections of when we've stepped away from our own inner truth.
And that leaves us with a really potent question for you to sit with, to explore in your own awareness. If that ultimate threat, the fear of divine rejection, which has been such a powerful theological weapon, if that was fundamentally based on a consistent mistranslation, and if the Source truly honors your radical freedom of awareness, what does that imply about the concept of sin? What if sin isn't primarily about breaking external rules or committing cosmic crimes? Or if the only real sin is mistaken identity, that choice to believe in and live from the illusion of separation? And what if simply correcting that mistaken identity is what reveals our true, inherent, beloved state as sons and daughters of the divine? Something to think about.